Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Kris. This is 1 and 2, or 1 and 3, so this is part 4 of how did Russia become an empire? Great Northern War victory. Victory? What? What did I just... Documentary. They don't even begin, they're not even close in the alphabet. I think my brain's dying. Video. I had to go back a little bit.
On the evening of the 18th, Swedish forces embarked on transport ships at Fassenholm and began their crossing. Meanwhile, engineers were ordered to create a makeshift floating bridge across the river as well. The crossing Swedish army, led by Charles himself, consisted of around 7,000 grenadiers and only 100 cavalry, while their Saxon counterpart had a 20,000-strong army on their side. As soon as the transport boats reached the middle of the river, the Saxon artillery started firing at them. However, the artillery barrage would be ineffective. At the same time, the Swedish artillery, placed both on their side of the river and on 2 riverboats, began shelling the Saxon redoubts. Awaiting the Swedish assault, a Saxon army under the command of Steinau drew up in 2 lines between the 2 redoubts. The army that Steinau managed to gather in such a short period of time consisted only of about 3,500 men, and it was made up mostly of infantry and a small amount of cavalry on the flanks. Charles, seeing that such a force was descending upon his men, drew up around 3,000 grenadiers and prepared for the Saxon assault. The Saxons attacked the Swedish army furiously, however their assault was halted, and they were forced to retreat after the Swedish army fired several volleys. This allowed for more Swedish troops to disembark and join the main body of the army, while at the same time, more of Steinau's men joined the fight as well. Undaunted by their initial failure, the entirety of the Saxon infantry drew up in a line and charged, meeting the same fate once again.
You would figure that you would have had better success attacking them, as they're landing, because now they've got a foothold on here. I'm not a military guy, so I don't know.
On their 3rd try, the Saxon cavalry tried to attack Charles's right flank. However, a part of the Swedish cavalry that just disembarked managed to push it back.
Oh, jeez.
This pattern of Saxon assaults and retreats dragged on until 7 AM on the next day, when the Swedish army captured the first redoubt. Steinau deemed it impossible to defend such a position and subsequently ordered a retreat. The majority
Sweden was quite the empire back in the days, weren't they? Or not empire, military. Well, maybe they were an empire. I don't know. Tell me.
The majority of the Saxon army retreated unscathed to the forts of Dunemunda and Kobrin, as bad weather prevented the Swedish engineers from finishing the bridge in time so that their cavalry could assault the Saxon army. Still, the Saxons lost more than 2,000 in this action, while Charles's casualties were around 500. In the following days, Kobrin and Dunemunda fell to the Swedish army, with Kockenhusen and the rest of Livonia and Kurland falling into their hands in the next few weeks. A small Russian army under Repnin that was sent by Peter to support the Saxons retreated to the east without participating in the battle. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had been neutral up until that point, with the majority of their magnates opposing the war with Sweden and using the liberum veto to avoid it. Charles himself was in a position of power at that moment and could have signed a peace treaty with Augustus. Aware of the elector's deceitful nature, the young Swedish king knew that there would be no peace with Poland for as long as Augustus remained king. Therefore, dethroning him seemed like the only option to secure Livonia and advance to Russia unhindered. It is also speculated that Charles had taken a personal disliking towards Augustus, as the two of them had quite opposite personalities. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was far from what it once was. The cracks on the internal political machine of the state were evident. Many of the magnates did not support their elected king, and some were even openly against him. In the beginning of autumn in 1701, as soon as Charles started advancing into Kurland, he was met by several minor Lithuanian nobles, asking him to avoid taking control of their lands in exchange for their logistical support. Lithuania was, at the time, divided between two powerful noble families, the Oginsky and the Sapieha. Augustus himself was at odds with the Sapieha family and allowed the Oginsky to raid their lands with impunity. The two counts of Sapieha, seeing an opportunity to protect their lands and expand their influence, met with Charles as well, offering their support in exchange for protection against Oginsky and the dethroning of Augustus. Although minor Swedish expeditions took place in Lithuania in the last few months of 1701, with Kaunas and Vilnius falling by January, no significant result was achieved, as Oginsky refused to give open battle and was still harassing the Swedish forces. By February of 1702, Charles returned to Kurland and started making preparations for his advance on Warsaw. Seeing the gravity of the situation, Augustus called for a diet in the capital, asking the Polish nobility for support. The diet did not resolve any crucial issues, with many magnates using that chance to voice their dissatisfaction with Augustus. Nevertheless, the nobility agreed to send 5 of their members to Charles to try and negotiate a peace once again, this time with the Dutch Republic's mediation. The 5 diplomats, some nobles and some members of the Catholic Church, met with Charles on several occasions. The divisions in the ranks of the Commonwealth were seen here as well. At first, the diplomats tried to convince Charles to agree to their peace terms. However, after several days, they started bickering among themselves, much to the Swedish king's annoyance. Incensed by their disrespect, Charles halted all further negotiations and moved for Warsaw, determined to take it. Having learned of the Swedish king's inflexibility, Augustus decided to leave Warsaw for the old capital of Krakow. With Warsaw falling to the Swedes by late spring, Augustus attempted a last-ditch effort to secure peace and sent the Archbishop of Gniezno, Cardinal Radziejowski. Unknown to Augustus, the cardinal had already exchanged several letters with Charles, assuring him of his friendly intentions. Whether the cardinal intended to betray Augustus at that point still remains unclear. Furthermore, after spending some time with Charles, the cardinal advised him against dethroning the king, as the Polish people would not only change their attitude towards the Swedes, but also that they would never view the new king as legitimate. As Augustus still was not decisively defeated, Charles did not give too much thought to the cardinal's advice, but focused on the war instead. It was the middle of June when Charles began his march towards Krakow. He reached the town of Kielce, where he learned that Augustus linked up with the Polish army under Lubomirski at Sandomierz. After an unsuccessful Saxon ambush on a Swedish scouting unit, the Swedes learned of Augustus's position at Klisov. On the morning of the 17th of July, Charles departed from Kielce at the head of his army, reaching the village of Opietza, which was 4 kilometers away from Klisov, on the evening of the same day. Even though the Swedish army was smaller and lacked cavalry, Charles wanted to attack. Ultimately, he heeded the advice of his generals and waited for one more day for his cavalry to arrive. As the Swedish cavalry arrived on the 18th, so did rumors about a Saxon attack, which was supposed to take place on the morning of the 19th. However, the Saxon army had not turned up by 9 AM, so Charles drew up his army and began marching towards their positions at Klisov. He had roughly 12,000 men at his disposal, with about 8,000 grenadiers and 4,000 cavalry, as well as 4 artillery pieces. The army was drawn up in 2 lines. The cavalry was placed on the wings and the infantry in the centre. The right wing was commanded by Charles XII himself, the centre by von Lewin, and the left wing by Duke Frederick IV of Holstein-Gottorp. The majority of the Swedish army advanced through the forest towards Klisov, with only the left wing taking the more open route. Just as the Swedish left arrived on the plains outside Klisov, they were noticed by a Saxon cavalry regiment that was led by Augustus. As the Saxon Elector was confident that only a small unit was advancing towards his positions, he lowered his guard and did not take the threat seriously. Charles, seeing the element of surprise as critical, ordered his cavalry to lower their standards and the infantry to lower their pikes, just as they passed onto the plains outside Klisov. Augustus fell for that trap as well, and perceived the Swedish army as only a reconnaissance unit.
Shouldn't you still try to go after them if it's just a reconnaissance unit? Am I wrong on that? Because you'd want to capture them before they report it back to the enemy. What do I know?
The Saxon army consisted of 16,000 men, 9,000 of whom were infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Augustus also had an 8,000 strong Polish cavalry unit, consisting of 1,000 elite winged hussars, 3,000 panzerni, 500 dragoons, and 3,500 Cossacks and Wallachian light horse. The army of Augustus also had the majority of its infantry in the centre and the cavalry on the flanks. The left wing was led by von Tremper, the centre by Schulenberg, and the right by von Flemming, while the Polish units on the far right were led by Lubomirski. Augustus's forces occupied the higher ground, where they placed their 46 artillery pieces, and their position was also additionally protected by a chevaux de frise. At noon, Charles ordered his right wing to pass around the woodlot in front of it from the left side, also the centre and left wing to advance directly towards the Saxon positions. Now aware that this was not just a reconnaissance unit, but the main Swedish army, Augustus ordered his artillery to fire on the Swedish forces. Right before the Saxon camp, there was a dense marsh from the village of Kokot to the village of Vyszbica, which hindered the Swedish advance. The Saxons were in a very advantageous position at that point, their artillery wreaking havoc upon the Swedish army. Charles XII, seeing the absolute impossibility of attacking the enemy directly, ordered his army to wheel to the left, thereby taking higher ground and disengaging from the marshes. The Saxon army, now being forced to draw towards the right, left its advantageous positions on the high ground, and a part of it ended up in the marshes instead. At 2 p.m, the Swedish left wing began its attack. Just as Frederick IV was marching towards the Polish cavalry, he was struck by a cannonball and was taken to his tent, where he would die a few hours later.
Damn.
Now commanded by Welling, the Swedish left still charged the Polish cavalry thrice, completely crushing even the winged hussars and forcing the entire wing to rout. Afterwards, Charles took control of the left and began advancing towards the Saxon centre. To avoid being outflanked, the Saxon centre began a retreat. However, they exposed themselves to the elite Swedish infantry in the centre, which began firing destructive volleys at them, dealing massive casualties. The Saxon retreat was made even more difficult by the marshland which was behind their initial position, and the Swedish soldiers used that opportunity to shoot as many of them down as possible. On the other side of the battlefield, the Saxon cavalry attacked the Swedish right wing. Though the Saxons initially had the upper hand there, they were repulsed by the Swedish right and were forced to retreat. As the main Saxon army had already routed, their left ran into the rest of the Swedish army on their retreat. The Saxon left bravely fought to escape from their encirclement. However, they lost many men to the fire from the Swedish infantry in the process. In the end, the winning Swedish army lost less than 1,000 men, while the Saxons lost 3,700, 1,700 of whom were captured. The exact number of Polish casualties is unknown, however they are noted to have been great. The Swedish army also ended up in possession of the 46 Saxon artillery pieces and their war chest. Augustus's downplaying of the danger which the Swedish army posed to his own cost him the advantageous initial position. That, combined with the superiority of the Swedish soldiers and Charles's tactical acumen, proved to be an insurmountable obstacle for the Saxon-Polish army.
Either Augustus isn't great, or Charles is really good.
Augustus retreated with what was left of his army to Sandomierz, hoping to get more support from the Diet there, while on the 31st of July, Charles entered Krakow. The Battle of Klisov marked the last time that the famed winged hussars were used in battle. Symbolically, it would also mark the beginning of the end of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This decisive victory brought Charles one step closer to a complete victory, which seemed impossible less than 2 years ago. A couple of weeks later, a 12,000-strong Swedish army from Pomerania arrived in Krakow as well. Augustus, seeing the gravity of the situation, left Sandomierz with 4,000 cavalry and advanced towards Warsaw to retake it. He had hoped to call for another diet and gather military and financial support from the nobility. The diet did not go according to his plans though, as an increasing number of noblemen voiced their dissatisfaction with the fact that Augustus involved the Commonwealth in the war. Several noblemen even threatened to openly back Charles in the conflict. Growing more desperate, Augustus sent countless envoys to the Swedish king in the autumn of 1702. However, Charles would not accept any of the terms that were offered. Fearing that all of his offers to Charles would go unanswered, Augustus begged for the aid of his liege via the Electorate of Saxony, the Holy Roman Emperor. Leopold I acquiesced, though his motives were not as selfless as they seemed, as the treaty he offered Charles stipulated that Sweden and Poland would end all hostilities, and that all Saxon troops would leave to join the imperial army in the War of the Spanish Succession. The young king dismissed even this offer, as he was determined to defeat Augustus completely. By 1703, Augustus was forced to flee Warsaw again, while Charles continued consolidating his position in Poland. Although we have neglected this theatre of war for some time, it is time to return to Ingria and Estonia. As Charles turned southwards after the Battle of Narva, Tsar Peter was given some much-needed time to reinforce and improve the Russian army. Boris Sheremetev, the only Russian commander to have escaped after the Battle of Narva, was given command over the Russian forces in the north. Small raids into Estonia and Ingria were conducted regularly during 1701, but they were not decisive by any means. The first serious attempt to probe the Swedish defences in the area was made in September, when Sheremetev led a 7,000-strong army into Estonia. However, von Schlippenbach intercepted the Russian advance with a 3 times smaller army and defeated Sheremetev at Reuj.
Wow.
On the 7th of January 1702, Schlippenbach, who was posted between Arasfer and Aya, received word from one of his commanders that Sheremetev was advancing with a large force towards his position. Although Schlippenbach received another piece of information that the Russian force was merely a raiding party, he immediately departed towards the village of Aya. The next day at 4 p.m, the alarm sounded that the Russian forces were approaching Varban. Swedish reconnaissance learned that the Russians were carrying 2,000 wooden stakes and 30 cannons, which meant that the force was not a raiding party, but an actual army. Still unaware of the true size of the Russian army, Schlippenbach ordered Baron Lewin to harass them with his cavalry, while he gathered as many men as he could. The Swedes were accustomed to fighting while outnumbered, however this time they faced a massive 6-to-1 disadvantage. Facing the 12 to 13,000 strong Russian vanguard, Lewen's forces were easily massacred. The Russian army advanced quickly afterwards, which ensured that Schlippenbach could not muster all of his men. Finally, the two main forces faced each other near the village of Kamar. Schlippenbach had around 3,000 men under his command.
How much more is this one? I'll go ahead, this is 46, it's 3 more minutes. I'll go ahead and do this one. I went past it, I was just getting into it, sorry.
As well as 6 artillery pieces. Meanwhile, Sheremetev had 18,000 men and 30 cannons. Schlippenbach, now heading the cavalry, decided to attack a part of the Russian vanguard to give time to his infantry and artillery to form up and prepare. While the Swedish cavalry was fighting against the sea of Russian soldiers, several Russian regiments cut them off from the rest of their army. This forced Schlippenbach to retreat, suffering minor losses in the process. Although Tsar Peter was doing his best to reform the army, it was only a year after the Battle of Narva, and the Russian soldiers were still inexperienced and poorly trained. Schlippenbach saw the immobile mass of Russian soldiery as the perfect target for his own artillery corps. In a letter to Charles XII, he remarked, "The enemy, having presently followed us, were so well greeted on their arrival by the cannon and foot that they broke and retreated." Finally, the entire Russian army drew up for battle. Judging the situation too unfavorable, Schlippenbach decided to retreat to Arastver, where several hundred Swedish soldiers arrived during the beginning of the battle. The Russian forces were constantly harassing the Swedish army, barely giving them a chance to form up. Finally, at Arastver, Schlippenbach managed to properly deploy his army, with the infantry in the center and the cavalry on the flanks.
I apologize for not asking that much, but I'm just enjoying the video and I don't have anything to contribute.
The battle started with an exchange of volleys. Although the Russian forces vastly outnumbered their Swedish counterparts, the fighting was a stalemate due to the Swedish army's superior training. The tide of battle turned when the 30 Russian cannons started firing. Not only did the Swedes suffer major losses due to this, but some of their artillery was disabled as well.
Ooh.
Schlippenbach, seeing no other choice, opted for a risky tactic. He ordered his cavalry to alternately cover the infantry and artillery while they were under fire. This move backfired, as the cavalry started fleeing because of the massive incoming fire, and they ran into their own men. Disorder broke within the Swedish ranks, and all the while the Russian army started advancing towards them. Schlippenbach and his officers tried to rally the troops, however it was too late. Some of the cavalry managed to cover the retreat to Dorpat, while much of the infantry was killed or captured. Peter was so elated at the news of his army's victory that he promoted Sheremetev to field marshal and sounded the bells in Moscow for the people to hear. After Arastver, the Russians faced almost no significant opposition in the area and were able to advance deep into Ingria. In the summer of 1702,
on that little blurb that came up about 30 seconds ago, it said that victory was the first one where the Russians realized they could beat Sweden. And I know they had a lot more troops, but you kind of need the one. Now you can look back at it now and say, well, you outnumbered them. What was it, 6-1 or whatever? Doesn't matter, especially when you rout them like that. You know, got to build up confidence. You got to build up your belief that you can win. And even though you had strong numbers, Sweden didn't care. They still attacked. So this is a good series. I'm learning. I'm trying. Oh, okay. I was just looking to see how long that one was. Well, I'm gonna end this one here, and we're gonna call that 1, 2. This is 1 and 2, 3. This is 4 and 5. Like and subscribe, or this will play out again it's, you know what it is, this video is going to loop on your YouTube channel and it won't let you do anything. And you're just gonna have to watch me watching this video. That's not fun. So have a good day, have a good night.